The Pittsburgh Steelers season is over. They've lost 5 in a row, and they lose to their arch rivals, the Baltimore Ravens. The final 28-14. Steelers finish the 2024 season having lost 5 consecutive games, and it's now their 6th consecutive playoff loss. Where do the Pittsburgh Steelers go from here? That's next here on the Bleav in Steelers postgame show. Today's episode of the Bleav in Steelers postgame show is brought to you by BetOnline.ag. Now that we're into Wild Card weekend, if you want to get in on any of the NFL action, BetOnline.ag is the place to do it. Live in-game betting, over-under, player spreads, props. Get in on the action today over at BetOnline.ag. BetOnline, the game starts here. Where to start? Let's start with the game tonight, and then what this means moving forward for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The first half, down 21-0. You can't even muster 60 yards of offense, and the Ravens have more than 300 yards of offense on their own. You can't stop a basic read option play between King Henry and Lamar Jackson. The edge rusher, whether it's TJ Watt or Highsmith or whoever was on the edge, the guy that's the key, crashed down on King Henry every time Lamar would pull it, and you lose contain, you lose the game. Just awful. Just awful. There were 2 plays in the first half that stuck out to me. They got it out to Pat Freiermuth to try to convert for a first down out in the flat. He gets stopped short by a defensive back by the Ravens. There was that play. And then they were able to get the Ravens in like a second or third down and long. Lamar Jackson breaks contain again, finds his receiver, and Minkah Fitzpatrick was trying to rip the ball loose for a forced fumble, and Dante Jackson looked like he wanted no part of the contact. The Ravens receiver fights and gets the first down. Where's the relentless pursuit to the football? We saw it again in the second half on King Henry's long touchdown run. Russell Wilson and the Steelers go down and score a touchdown. And there were plenty of guys around Derrick Henry, yet then he went and outran all of the Steelers defenders. There is no tomorrow. Like, someone wake up this Steelers team to say, hey, your season is done and over with. There isn't a game next week if you don't win. And this was reflective of, okay, Mike Tomlin not having his team ready to go tonight, but it's been more reflective considering the Pittsburgh Steelers haven't led at any point of a game since December the 8th. That's more than a month. Down the stretch of how the Pittsburgh Steelers played this season, you really have to think about some changes if you're Arthur Rooney II in the front office, Omar Khan, in saying, is Mike Tomlin going to be the guy? And I'm going to get into why I would not fire Mike Tomlin, and I'll explain my rationale here in a second. But for tonight's game, yet again, we saw that the Steelers had a huge deficit. The last 6 Steelers playoff games, the Steelers have been outscored in the first quarter 73-0. The 2016 game against the New England Patriots, down 10-0. 2017, 21-0 to Jacksonville. 2020 to Cleveland, 28-0. 2021, 35-7. 2023 against Buffalo, 21-0. Tonight, 21-0. Yet again in the playoffs where this team is not ready to play from the jump. And I give Russell Wilson and the offense credit for clawing their way back to maybe get a shot. But come on, there's no consolation prizes in the playoffs. They finally turned Russ loose in the second half because the running game wasn't working. We'll get into the stats here in a bit too. But yet another abysmal start for the Steelers team when it comes to the postseason. Outscored in the opening frame of their last 5 games, 47-3. Yikes. Yikes. First half, 59 yards of offense total for the Steelers. The Ravens had 308, 164 rushing yards for the Ravens in the first half, 19 for the Steelers, 144 passing yards for the Ravens to 40 for the Pittsburgh Steelers, 19 first downs for the Ravens, 2 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They were lucky it was only 21-0. And why am I as critical about the defense as I have been in recent weeks? This is the NFL's highest paid defense. There wasn't a want to. There wasn't a relentless pursuit to the football. There wasn't rallying 11 dudes and flying to the ball. There was no enthusiasm. And it's the playoffs against the Ravens, who's your biggest rival. Who's your biggest rival. It's just not acceptable. Not acceptable if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. All right, let's get to the portion of the program because we're going to talk a lot about the changes and what you want to see done. And if you want Mike Tomlin out, the Steelers shouldn't fire him. Whether they keep him or get rid of him, firing Mike Tomlin is not a viable option because he has trade value. If you are a proponent of the Steelers moving on from Mike Tomlin, you say it's time, 18 years, thank you for Super Bowl 43. You led us to Super Bowl 45. It hasn't worked in now 6 straight playoff games. Okay, you trade him to one of the other teams that is in need of a head coach for a few different reasons. Number one, you can get some capital back, whether it's draft picks, whether it's a really good player. You can get something in return. Number two, it eliminates one of the teams that is in need of a head coach. So if you're eliminating at least one team that needs a head coach, you can then go get your guy. If it's, say, Ben Johnson. And initially I thought a trade to the Chicago Bears would be ridiculous. If this was called in tomorrow, I think both fan bases, both the Bears and the Pittsburgh Steelers, would be thrilled. Now, should you cater to the fans all the time? No. But if you're a proponent of wanting to finally say, you know what, Mike Tomlin, who's largely been successful as head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, you don't want to see the Steelers fire him because there's still years left on that contract. And that's not to absolve him for tonight. But if you want the Steelers to move on, you actually want the Steelers to trade him to get something back. Because I think pretty much any of the other teams that need a head coach would love to have him. And you have to ask yourself, is it time? Because okay, do we want to point to Terrell Austin and finally say that maybe the team should have kept Brian Flores instead? What good is that really going to solve? What good is that going to solve tonight, bringing Russell Wilson back for, say, I don't know, $25 or $30 million a year when this is going to be as good as it gets? He's not getting any younger. Russ actually played he showed me something in the second half. He did. Because they finally turned him loose. He was 20 of 29, 270 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was sacked 4 times. But the vaunted Steelers football, 11 carries for 29 yards tonight against the Baltimore Ravens. Oh, man. Is Najee Harris going to be on this team next year? I don't think so. Dan Moore Jr., who got hurt, I think it was, I wrote this down. Calvin Anderson filling in at the left tackle position. I think Dan Moore played his last game as a Steeler. 11 carries for 29 yards. And they finally just said, hey, we're going to let Russ cut it loose. And they at least had a shot. I mean, I thought Russ made some nice throws in the second half. Where was that same urgency in the first half? When it was clear the running game couldn't get going, you get one-dimensional and you see what happens. But, man. George Pickens caught all 5 passes thrown his way. He responded well after what was his worst game as a Steeler. 5 catches, 87 yards. Had a beautiful touchdown. It was a beautiful throw by Wilson in the second half to cut the deficit. At that point, it was 28-14, which wound up being the final. Najee Harris, 3 catches, 41 yards. Van Jefferson, 2 catches for 37 yards. He had a touchdown. Mike Williams had 1 catch for 37 yards. Calvin Austin III, 1 catch for 25 yards. Jaylen Warren, 4 catches, 19 yards. Pat Freiermuth, 3 catches for 15 yards in tonight's game. Landon Roberts was the Pittsburgh Steelers' leading tackler. He had 14 tackles. in today's game. They couldn't stop the running game, though. Derrick Henry, 26 carries, 186 yards, 2 touchdowns. Had the long 44-yard touchdown run as well. Most rushing yards allowed by the Steelers in the playoffs. 166 yards was the previous record. Lamar Jackson, 16 to 21, 175 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air. Jackson also had 15 carries for 81 yards on the ground. Why the Steelers' edge guys were crashing down, that's what they were being coached to do. And you lose contain, you lose the game, and you let Lamar Jackson run wild in addition to King Henry. And look, I know that they're going to make a lot of teams foolish, but this was also a team without Zay Flowers tonight, without their best receiver tonight. And this offense was just prolific in the first half. Just there was no fight to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Oh, man. Where do you go from here? A lot of unrestricted free agents for the Pittsburgh Steelers going into this offseason. So we're going to get into some of the changes that the team will need to make, and I'll get to what Yinz think with your comments. Russell Wilson, Dan Moore, Najee Harris, James Daniels, Dante Jackson, Elandon Roberts, Van Jefferson, DeMonte Casey, Justin Fields, Isaiah Loudermilk, Cam Sutton, Mike Williams, Nate Herbig, Michael Pruitt, and Kyle Allen. Let's start here. You've got to make a decision of which quarterback you're going to prioritize bringing back, and that's either Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. If Russ comes back, I think it's something like a 3-year deal with that 3rd year being a team option, and I wouldn't want that annual salary to be north of $30 million. Pittsburgh's going to have about $53 million of cap space going into this offseason. If you want to bring Russ back as a bridge quarterback, whether it's Wilson or Fields, they're going to be a bridge for whoever the next guy is. I'm more of a proponent to say, let's see what Fields has at 25. He's continuing to develop, and hopefully Justin Fields' best football is still ahead of him. This is no knock on Russ. I think he largely outperformed what the expectations were for him for the Pittsburgh Steelers this season. How could it get any better than it was this season, though? And especially when you're allocating more money to him that right now you can afford to pay other players. And one of the big things is what the Pittsburgh Steelers do to try to get another wide receiver. So depending on how much money they allocate to quarterback, whether it's Russ, whether it's Fields, that's something you absolutely must address, whether it be through free agency, a trade, or the NFL draft. So I would prioritize Fields, but again, with the question of do you bring back Wilson or Fields, it's for what price? Ideally, you'd love to bring both guys back, no doubt. But the business and the reality of the NFL is Pittsburgh's going to have to choose one. I really don't think that there's a quarterback in this draft that could be potentially the Steelers' future, the heir to Big Ben, the next blue chip guy. Look at the AFC. Jackson, Mahomes, Burrow, Allen, Stroud, Herbert. You're going to need someone to compete with those guys. Someone who could, go toe-to-toe with any one of those guys. Because going into today's game, having lost 4 straight coming into today, Pittsburgh was last among all of the AFC teams in the playoffs to emerge as the AFC champion to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. And a big part of that is quarterback talent relative to the conference. I would prioritize bringing Fields back. It's no knock on Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson turned me into a fan of his this season. And even in the second half, I thought they finally turned him loose. He at least gave the Steelers a shot in the second half. He did. Why they didn't throw the ball down the field with him in the first half. His longest completion in the first half of today's game was 9 yards. Didn't get any help from the running game. And why this team wasn't ready to go from the jump is something that I think is a problem way bigger than how Russell Wilson performed tonight. Because it's something we've seen now for 6 straight playoff games if you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So you've got to bring one of the two back. I mean, there's people out there who be like, well, what about if Aaron Rodgers is a free agent and he's in his 40s now, or if Atlanta cuts ties early with Kirk Cousins? If we're talking about really winning a Super Bowl here, bring one of the two back and then go identify a guy, free agency, trade, drafts. This might sound crazy. Arch Manning in 2026. What would you need to do to be able to go get a blue chip prospect on that caliber? Because this year, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are going to be top picks in this year's draft. The Steelers are not going to select high enough to get either one of the two. So you're going to have to make a big trade, a big splash. And if you're Omar Khan, the analogy I'd make is this. If you want to knock one out of the park, you got to swing for the fences. And you've got to be able to identify who you could go get at the quarterback position. I understand what the Steelers have done because I don't think that guy's really been out there. And that's how I've always defended Mike Tomlin, to say he hasn't had the quarterback that he needs to compete. The flip side of that is Mike Tomlin is heavily involved in constructing the roster. I don't blame Pittsburgh if the Steelers front office and their staff truly felt that that quarterback wasn't out there. Why make the same mistake that the Browns did with Deshaun Watson? Why make the same mistake as the Atlanta Falcons just made with Kirk Cousins? I get it. I understand it. But at some point in time, further down the line, Pittsburgh's going to have to be able to try to go get a dude at the quarterback position for how football's played. For how football's played in 2025 and beyond. We're not in the same world where Brad Johnson, Trent Dilfer, Ben at the start of his career, where you have a game manager quarterback who goes on to win a Super Bowl. Go look at the last 20 Super Bowl winners. Stud quarterbacks. And if you go into any playoff game, Pittsburgh's going to be an underdog relative to what the team's quarterback talent has been. This was the biggest. This line closed. I think it was either 9.5 or 10 points. It was the biggest underdogs Pittsburgh's ever been against the Ravens going into this game. So that's a big thing. I want to hear about other changes you guys can think. I'm going to get to what Yinz think here in just a second. Let me go through the unrestricted free agents, though. Dan Moore Jr. won't be back, so you move Broderick Jones over to left tackle. Troy Fautanu takes over at right tackle. In his second year, what will essentially be his rookie year, because he missed all of this season with the knee injury. So your line gets even younger. Mason McCormick, I'd imagine, takes over for James Daniels at the right guard position. Najee Harris is a free agent, so I'd try to bring Jaylen Warren back and then pair a rookie running back. You talk about depth. This is a running back class in this year's draft that's loaded at running back. You don't need to go get a guy in the first round, second, third, fourth round. Go identify a guy who you can pair with Jaylen Warren. I like Najee Harris as a pro. I thought he ran hard at times. But when you talk about, okay, November, December, January football, Najee Harris's last 100-yard game came on October the 28th. He had 3 straight 100-yard games against bad teams. You can go look this up. And it's not all on him. A lot of that's been on the offensive line. But 11 carries for 29 yards. And Najee Harris was your first-round pick a few years ago. That's why they didn't pick up his 5th-year deal. I'd imagine he'll be on another team next year. Dante Jackson at the cornerback position, maybe for a certain price. But what I saw on tape on that conversion, I think it was a second down and long, where Minka's trying to strip the Ravens receiver, and Jackson looked like he wanted no part of the contact and to try to prevent the Ravens receiver from getting the first down. I see stuff like that on tape, and that's a want to. The tape doesn't lie. The tape's your resume. And I see that, it'd be one thing. It's early season game. A playoff game? Come on. Maybe for what price for Dante Jackson? He had a lot of interceptions this year. Elandon Roberts, tonight, 14 tackles. I don't know if Cole Holcomb can work his way back. You've got Patrick Wilson. You've got Patrick Queen. So might be Elandon Roberts' final game in a Pittsburgh Steelers uniform. Depends on the price. Van Jefferson, gone. Casey, I could see KZ leave. I really like the acquisition of Deshaun Elliott this year. I thought he played really hard this year. Fields, I would prioritize bringing back if he's going to cost too much or if Russ is going to cost too much. I think it's going to be really hard for the Steelers to bring back both. And especially because both guys are competitive. I respect their professionalism this year, both Wilson and Fields, for handling that. Pittsburgh's going to send back a 6th-round pick to Chicago for the Fields deal. And so 4-2 is a starter. The packages they used for Fields, I thought, were mostly ineffective, but he didn't have enough snaps to determine one way or another. I would try to bring Fields back instead of Wilson, but I think you bring back one of the two, and it really doesn't matter in terms of, again, big picture playoff success. Because, look, here's another thing, too, and I'll keep going through the changes in the free agents. Even if you beat the Baltimore Ravens, if this goes according to chalk, the Steelers, because they lost their last 4 regular season games, if it goes according to chalk, they would have had to win on the road against Baltimore, which didn't happen. They'd have then had to go on the road against Kansas City, the back-to-back Super Bowl champions. And if somehow they beat Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, they would have then had to go on the road against Buffalo just to make the Super Bowl. And you might blame the schedule and 11 days of on the road against Philly and on the road against Baltimore on a shortened week on a Saturday and then on Christmas Day against the Chiefs. You couldn't lose all 3 of those games. And then blowing the finale to the Cincinnati Bengals. You haven't led in a game since December the 8th, period. We keep going through the free agents. Isaiah Loudermilk, yeah. Cam Sutton, bye-bye. Mike Williams, maybe you bring him back if it's a favorable contract just because you need some sort of depth there. But the Steelers need new receivers. Another guy, Roman Wilson, who you drafted out of Michigan. I know battled injuries earlier on. Could Roman Wilson have really been that much worse than what we've seen? You spent draft capital on him, and he hardly saw the field. Again, I know he battled injuries. Could it have been worse than what the Steelers put on the field this season at the receiver position outside of George Pickens? Seriously? Nate Herbig at the center position. I think that's Zach Frazier's position now, unless Herbig wants to say, hey, I can play guard 2 maybe, and I'll come back on a cheap deal. Michael Pruitt, whatever. Kyle Allen, maybe you need quarterback depth. I don't know. And to have him have familiarity with Arthur Smith's system, assuming Arthur Smith comes back and he's not hired as a head coach by another team. Those are the free agents for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Terrell Austin's future needs to be questioned. Mike Tomlin's future needs to be questioned. But I would not fire Mike Tomlin because I think he has trade value. Even if you're the biggest proponent to say, let's see what a new coach could do. The Steelers don't do it that often. Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, Mike Tomlin. In that same time span, I've said this before, I'll say it again. There have been more popes of the Catholic Church during that same time span, but it might be time. And if it is time, if you're the Steelers, use Mike Tomlin's value to make a trade to get something back in return, and then prevent another team. It creates one less opening. And if the Steelers identify 2 or 3 coaches they really want to go hire, I think Ben Johnson's really the hottest name out there this go around. Looks like Mike Vrabel's going to the Patriots. If the Steelers did really want to move on, that's what they could do. Will they do that? I doubt it. I doubt it. And that's not to say that Mike Tomlin hasn't been successful in his tenure with the Steelers. January 15th, 2017 marks the team's last playoff win. Let's get to what Yinz think. There are more than 100 live comments in the chat. So if you want to get involved with Bleav in Steelers, I'll go through the chat now. Several ways to hop in. I have pinned this in the comments. If you're as frustrated as I am after this game, you can call into the show here on StreamYard, here on the Bleav in Steelers show. Just tap the link. It's pinned in the show notes. If you want to weigh in and sound off, I understand. You can also leave a chat. I'll get to those now. If you want to financially support Bleav in Steelers, leave a super chat. If you do financially support the show, I will read your comment as well. So a lot of ways you can get involved. We got a great community here on the Bleav in Steelers postgame show. We go live after every single Steelers game. And there's 173 people watching. I think that's the most that have tuned in for the Bleav in Steelers postgame show. So thank you for, being part of this. And also like having a sense of community and just having, somewhere you can go for almost Steelers therapy, because what we saw in tonight's performance, it just wasn't acceptable. It's not Steelers football. And guys like Cam Hayward, guys like TJ Watt deserve better. Think about how prolific of a player that TJ Watt has been as a Pittsburgh Steeler, and he hasn't even won a playoff game. That's unbelievable to me. For as good as TJ Watt has been for this organization, he doesn't even have a playoff win to show for it. And that's not a reflection on him so much as the fact that there are changes that need to be made for the betterment of this team. Overall, people aren't going to want to hear this, but this is true. Overall, this season was a success for the Steelers. The over-under win total was 8.5. The Steelers were picked by odds makers to finish last in the AFC North. But it's the way that the team finished down the stretch that's so incredibly disappointing. 5 consecutive losses to end the season, your 6th straight playoff loss, to where you get to about 10 wins each season, you sneak into the playoffs as a 6 or 7 seed, and you get smoked once you're there. A 28-14 final tonight was not reflective of this game was never even really truly close. There were a few times where it's like, man, the Steelers are 1 play away from being down just 1 possession in this game. It never happened. Let's get to what Yinz think. There's a ton of comments here. Let's start with Rich Durbin checking in saying, who's the quarterback? I don't think Russ is the answer. Develop Fields, draft, or sign another one. Try to get the O-line to gel. Try to figure out what's up with the D. I would have Fields be your quarterback. I would try to either get a free agent or the draft. I don't think there's the blue chip guy, though. And again, Cam Ward's going to be the top pick, probably to Tennessee. I think Shedeur Sanders is your second quarterback off the board. This is not a quarterback-rich draft like we saw this past season with Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Bo Nix, Michael Penix. Saw a lot of really good quarterback play from rookies this past year. This is not that type of quarterback class. Rich, thank you for weighing in. Appreciate it. Mr. Woodside saying the first half our defense was ridiculous. Just when you think that it can't get any worse, it does. Highest paid defense in the NFL. And what Omar Khan needs to do, I know this has been a really good defense at time. You can't be the NFL's highest paid defense anymore and have out projections like that. For how the sport's played, you got to allocate more of the capital to the offensive side of the ball. 21-0 at half. The Steelers, the way they played, 308 yards given up to Lamar Jackson in that offense in the first half. Not acceptable. Chad checking in saying this game was more lopsided than the score. Agreed there, Chad. It took the Ravens too long to score in the first half. Yeah. Stony Baloney says that he thinks that the offense was worse than the defense tonight. Would love to hear your thoughts there. Stony Baloney says we could have sustained some drives in the first half and scored at least 1 or 2 drives. It would have been a different game. Yeah, I mean, I suppose. 59 yards of offense in the first half for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I said this, I tweeted this out, and Russ played better in the second half, but I said if the Steelers go 3 and out on their first drive in the second half, I would have played Fields the rest of the half. But Russ drove him down. I mean, some big-time throws on that drive to Calvin Austin the third over the middle, and then had Mike Williams on a third down throw, and then the touchdown to Van Jefferson. It's like, where's their production been all season long? Ed saying that Ed is a proponent of trading Mike Tomlin to the Dallas Cowboys. That would require the Cowboys to fire Mike McCarthy. Right now, as at the time of this recording on Saturday, January the 11th, Mike McCarthy's still the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. I think Dallas is still trying to make a decision, but I know that the Chicago Bears had requested to interview McCarthy, and Dallas prevented that from happening. Whether McCarthy's going to be back in Dallas is the big question there. But wouldn't that be interesting, of the two former rivals dating back to the 70s, if Dallas and Pittsburgh made a trade? Interesting destination there. Interesting thought there. Ed, thank you for waking in. Thank you for weighing in. Temple, a longtime viewer of the Bleav in Steelers show, checking in saying, Russ definitely showed something in the second half, but I really think that ship has sailed. I do too. For how the Steelers played down the stretch, and he's going to be older, and you're going to have to pay him more money if you want him to remain as a Pittsburgh Steeler. I know he has said, Russell Wilson has said, that he wants to come back and play another season for Pittsburgh. For what price? Because if it's not a really team-friendly deal, it's not going to work, and it's not going to get any better than what you saw down the stretch this season, particularly tonight. Russell Wilson made me a fan this year, and I can't believe I'm saying that. I would not have said that at the start of this season, but he still had some gas left in the tank. I think Russ this year, for what the Steelers are paying him, was a success this year for Pittsburgh. I do, overall. And tonight in the second half, man, if he could have played that way the whole game, maybe you would have had a game, but they didn't really turn him loose and let him throw it down the field to where you're facing a deficit, and then you're facing the clock, and it's too little too late. And that's what happens when you become one-dimensional. The Steelers couldn't run the ball tonight. 29 yards of rushing. Rich checking in again saying, Mr. Rooney's the only one who could do anything with Tomlin. I'm not sure he was alive the last time the Steelers fired a head coach. That's Rich, that's hilarious perspective. Mr. Woodside saying GP14 had a nice game. Yep, I thought he rebounded and responded well after what was probably his worst game. How you respond to adversity, I think, speaks volumes. George Pickens tonight, that touchdown he had to cut it to 28-14. It was a terrific throw by Wilson. And then to avoid the hit, to spin out of it, and then to get into the end zone, it was a remarkable play. And I think it's a play not many receivers can make in the NFL. Yet another sideline catch too. Steelers trying to come back down 28-14 and eventually turned it over on downs. Wilson threw it downfield to Calvin Austin III in the end zone. There were a bunch of Ravens defenders there, but Autumn checking in saying, I feel sorry for TJ Watt and Cam Hayward because they've been here the longest. Who knows if they're going to get a ring? A betting man would say no right now for both players. I mean, unless they're traded to another team. Cam Hayward, I'll be honest, I was wrong about. I thought that the contract extension he agreed to with the Steelers, where it was like, man, a player his age, I thought Cam Hayward played another really good season of football. And even at his advanced age, I don't think it's quite as good as it was at his peak. But the fact that he came back in the game, and I thought he played really well for the Steelers overall this season. A lot of pass breakups. But if you're Pittsburgh too, at some point, you're going to have to replace him. He's in his mid-30s now. And for as good as he is, Father Time's undefeated. The NFL stands for not for long. Would love to see Cam Hayward get to win a Super Bowl, but I don't know if I see it happening. Mr. Woodside saying that 88 he's out on, and that's Pat Freiermuth. Remember, Freiermuth got the contract extension too. Been patient with the concussions, Mr. Woodside says, but he's soft, flat out, not dependable. That play where he caught the ball out in the flat, and it's him and the Ravens defensive back, how he didn't pick up the first down is just beyond me. Lower your shoulder, and you've got the weight advantage there. And then the Steelers don't have the offensive line, and they don't get the push up front to where they can go for it on a 4th and short. You see Baltimore do that a lot. You see Philly do that a lot. Be aggressive. You want to be aggressive if you're the Steelers, but that just we saw them try to be aggressive the week before, and then they don't convert, and they put their defense in a terrible spot because they don't get the push up front that they need to be able to do to pick up yardage in short yardage situations. A lot of people being critical of Patrick Queen. Patrick Queen nowhere to be found. Sloppy. Ed making an observation saying TJ Watt used to crash on Lamar, not the running back. That was a difference tonight because in the second matchup, King Henry absolutely roasted the Pittsburgh Steelers. So tonight they went into the game and they kind of alluded to this a little bit in the broadcast, saying that the Steelers were going to key on Derrick Henry and let Lamar run a little bit. Well, it's kind of a pick your poison. Henry still finished with 186 yards. Jackson had 81 yards rushing. And the Ravens are going to cause problems for a lot of teams because you have to play an honest 11 on 11. But I would have keyed on Jackson to not lose contain on a really fast, quick quarterback. And then you've got to rely on your guys up front, A gap, B gap. I'm talking about the Cam Haywards of the world. I'm talking about the guys up front at the point of attack, center guard area. And then your linebackers as well, whether that's Queen, Landon Roberts, Peyton Wilson, the guys up front where you've got to win that battle. And look, Baltimore's going to win that battle against a lot of teams. But I saw this too, that James Harrison tweeted this during the game saying, when are they going to have the outside linebackers stop crashing down? Because you're losing contain and Jackson gets to the outside where he's going to eat you alive every time. It's really a pick your poison if you're the Steelers defense, but clearly what they had game planned for did not work, especially in the first half. Temple asking a question, asking if the refs called a single holding on the Ravens offensive line. I know there was some discussion going into tonight's game about the refereeing crew and the advantage that gives Baltimore, especially at home. I can look up the total penalties in the team stats, Temple. I'll do that right now. As my computer loads here. Only 3 penalties on the Ravens for 14 yards. The Steelers had 7 penalties for 41 yards. Pittsburgh finishes with 280 yards of total offense, and 251 came through the air. Ravens finished with 464 total yards. Wow. Ravens were 10 of 15 on third downs as well. And the Ravens had the ball for more than 39 minutes tonight, too. When the Steelers won this year, it was controlling the clock, winning the turnover battle. Not very flashy, but man. Rekha saying that my guess, Russ will be back. Tomlin loves him. Man. Yeah, a lot of people checking in and saying 30 mil for Russ is too much. Look what Kirk Cousins got. And then he's going to get cut, but the Falcons are going to pay a premium to do that if they do. Yeah, a lot of people weighing in on Tomlin and saying that Pittsburgh should fire him. Again, don't fire Tomlin if you want him gone. You trade him. He's got value to other teams. If you're just hopping in, if you trade him, you can get something back for him, number one. Number two, if you trade him, you got to go get a head coach. And that's one less team that then you're competing against to hire a head coach. And a lot of Steelers fans are going to think, oh, well, we're the Pittsburgh Steelers and we're going to get first-class, top-notch coach. We're a premier organization. Do the things that you need to do that give you the best odds of success. In trading Tomlin and not firing him allows you to do that if you're a proponent of getting rid of him. Because if you're Pittsburgh and you say, okay, it is time, enough's enough. This is 6 straight playoff losses. We got to change something up. You have to identify who do you want, and leave those in the comments too. I'll get to them. For me, it would be Ben Johnson. I think he's the best head coaching candidate. Ben Johnson and Vrabel were the top 2. It looks like Mike Vrabel's going to New England. Are there other coaches out there that you'd want? I know Cliff Kingsbury's out there. Pete Carroll might be trying to get back into being a head coach, even at his advanced age. Who are the coaches you would want? If you want Tomlin gone, who do you want the Pittsburgh Steelers to hire instead? For who could be the guy for the next 10, 15, 20 years to continue continuity at the head coaching position for the Pittsburgh Steelers organization, because that's something that has distinguished Pittsburgh is the long tenures of Null, Cowher, and Tomlin. And even in seasons that ended disappointment like tonight did. It's part of the appeal to Pittsburgh is the loyalty that the organization has had to the head coaches. Because really, if you want to get rid of Tomlin or you want to bring someone else in, I can understand the frustration. And maybe you win a playoff game or two with someone else. Are you going to win a Super Bowl if you don't have a stud quarterback? My answer is no every single time. So that's what you have to identify. I think that's heck of a lot more important than who's coaching, even despite the fact that these last 6 playoff wins, the start you've gotten off to, are just not acceptable. It's just not. So there's blame all around. There's blame all around. Autumn checking in again saying we need more money on the offensive side of the ball, wide receiver, cornerback, and we need better tackles. Nailed it. Nailed it. Wide receiver, corner, and then who's the guy that could replace Cam Hayward? Because if Cam Hayward doesn't play at the level that he does, this whole defense falls apart fast. Fast. And which quarterback do you want if you're Pittsburgh out there? Long-term, big picture, and think beyond just maybe one off season. Look to other free agencies. Most free agent quarterbacks are either above average to good. Like Kirk Cousins was the top free agent quarterback this past year. Teams, if a quarterback's really good, don't let their guys test the free agent market. May saying that the Steelers can't develop quarterbacks under Mike Tomlin. Well, hang on. Ben Roethlisberger was there for 18 years, so you didn't really need to. I think that's a little bit overstated. I appreciate the comment, though. A lot of people being like Arch Manning, man. That would be fun. A lot of people saying trade Tomlin. Again, think smarter. This is why we have the Bleav in Steelers show. Everyone's frustrated. And if that's what you're a proponent of, I think you really have to consider it. And what I would want to know too, before I jump on board saying, yes, trade Mike Tomlin, because 18 years has been largely a success. What you're getting into, who potentially you could hire, what you're receiving in return for a trade. These are all questions you have to ask yourself before we just say, yep, let's do it. We're frustrated. We're mad. Let's do it. What's the reality of the situation? Who can you go get that can be your head coach for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years? Marshall asking, how we let Brian Flores walk to keep Terrell Austin, I'll never know. I think that's pretty fair for how Minnesota's played this year. Curious to see if the Steelers make any changes to the coaching staff, whether Terrell Austin's future is in jeopardy. I think Mike Tomlin's future, I think that's on the table, that conversation right now, given the lack of recent playoff success. And I know Arthur Smith's gotten some interest as a head coach in other interviews. Is that just based on his experience, or is that another team saying, we actually are really interested in having Arthur Smith as our head coach? What changes are the Steelers going to make within the coaching staff is going to be fascinating. A lot of people saying we need a new offensive line coach. I've heard that for several years now. M. Rivers saying Fitz is nearing replacement time. He's lost a step. Let me look up Minkah Fitzpatrick's contract because the Steelers are paying him a premium. He finally broke his turnover streak this year. The 2023 season, he battled injuries, didn't have a single takeaway. Minkah Fitzpatrick's 28 years old, and he's still under contract for 2025 and 2026. Minkah Fitzpatrick, his cap hit is $22.36 million in 25 and 2026, $24.46 million. Wow. Now, the Steelers are paying him an average annual salary of $18 million, but it's the cap hit that's surprising. Now, He's already made his guaranteed money as part of the contract. It was $36 million guaranteed. So we'll see. But his cap hit of more, almost, between 22 and $23 million. Wow. So he wouldn't be an unrestricted free agent till 2027. It's a really good player. He makes big plays that aren't always turnovers, but is that a position that you want to pay a premium to? It's the same criticism that you have of, do you want to make Najee Harris a running back, a first-round pick? And we're talking about moves from the previous general manager. We're talking about Kevin Colbert's moves, not Omar Khan's moves. And again, this is part of the Tomlin criticism because Tomlin works so hand in hand with the front office, which by and large is a good thing. It is. But that's important context to have when you're talking about how to evaluate Mike Tomlin in the Steelers front office. People saying we need a receiver, a running back, a corner, and a defensive tackle, and maybe a quarterback too. Got to figure out the quarterback position. I'll be honest with you. I'll go on record saying this. I'd be surprised if they bring both Russell Wilson and Fields back. I think one of them comes back. We'll see how that shakes out. Yeah, I mean, people pointing this out that Tomlin drafted Pickett. Kenny Pickett was Kevin Colbert's, what he thought would be his parting gift to say, I'm going to give you Big Ben's hair. Tomlin's part of that process with Kevin Colbert. Omar Khan is the money man's involved, but ultimately that's Kevin Colbert's decision as the general manager of the team. That's my understanding. Mr. Woodside agreeing with me, saying that agrees with how Fields and Wilson, that was a big question I had going into this year is one of them just going to go on a media tirade of I'm not playing and I deserve to be, and this isn't unacceptable. How the Steelers handled their two quarterbacks this year and how both quarterbacks handled themselves. That was the biggest question I have is there going to be disgruntlement? I'm sure that Justin Fields was not thrilled that Wilson came in after the first 6 weeks and took over as the starter. But when this offense was at its best, it was Russell Wilson leading the charge this year, and it was his connection with George Pickens. But I thought both players should be commended with how they handled their opportunity, and I hope whether it's in Pittsburgh or elsewhere, I wish both of those guys the absolute best because they're both pros. They're pros. And I think both should be commended how they handled themselves because that was a huge question I had going into this year. A lot of people saying we need to fix the offensive line. The idea with that is Broderick Jones and Fautanu should be your tackles for hopefully the next decade. A lot of people saying something's wrong with the defense. A lot of people saying the Steelers should trade Tomlin, but for who? That's where you get creative. But you have to identify the Steelers. Let's look at the head coaching vacancies right now. Assuming the Patriots hire Vrabel. I'm pulling up the head coaching vacancies right now. I know Chicago is one of them. I know Las Vegas is one of them. Potentially Dallas. If the Cowboys move on from Mike McCarthy. Again, the Bears, the Patriots, maybe Dallas. Jacksonville. It's a possibility in the AFC. Because the Jags fired Doug Peterson. The New York Jets. Again, the Raiders, and then the New Orleans Saints. And we'll keep an eye on Dallas as well. So if you trade Tomlin, it would be to one of those teams. Dylan checking in saying the Steelers will never trade Tomlin. I would be shocked. But it's something you got to consider. And so if you want to bring Tomlin back for his 19th season, what's going to change? What is going to change? Temple bringing up a good point, saying it's hard not to overreact. Sad the season is over. End of the season really stings. It's not just the end of the season, Temple. It's the way that the Steelers folded down the stretch and how they weren't competitive down the stretch and how against Philly and Baltimore and Kansas City and Cincinnati and Philly and Baltimore again, you were never really in any of those games. December the 8th is the last time the Steelers led in a game of any sort. Going through comments. A lot of people want new coaches for Pittsburgh. I get it. And this is hilarious. Saying the drone messed everything up, not Tomlin. Oh, man. That is so funny. Yeah, I guess the reason why there was a stoppage in the game, they were trying to figure it out during the Amazon broadcast, is there was a drone over the game, so they had to wait. Ed asking for more drone coverage. Ed, I appreciate the humor. And this is why we have What Yinz Think here on the Bleav in Steelers show. This is just good, clean Pittsburgh humor. Oh, that is hilarious. Rocky pointing this out, saying that he has no trade clause. I Bleav you're referring to Mike Tomlin in his deal. If that's the case, then it's like you really have to consider. I don't think I would outright fire Mike Tomlin unless you know definitively who you're going to go get. Again, I'm asking for this in the comments. I'm still going through a lot of them. Who you want. Mem10 saying Ben Johnson's the guy he wants to go get. Who the other candidates that are out there? Cliff Kingsbury, I know, is a name that's out there. But it's like Cliff Kingsbury versus what Tomlin's accomplished. And that's where I boast Tomlin's resume. Put him up. And it's like, oh, well, one's an offensive coach and the Steelers need to step into the new era and stop playing checkers while the rest of the league plays chess. I get it. But if you don't have the horse to win the race, i.e. the quarterback, I don't think it matters, and I don't think it's even worth to say, oh, well, we need to go get a new head coach, because you got to figure out quarterback too. Forrest checking in. Good comment here. Forrest saying the players are too comfortable. They sign their contracts, and then they slack off and do the bare minimum. Tonight was a great example. Some frustration with Minka, some frustration with Pat Freiermuth. I mean, just go look at the guys who have gotten new deals. Interesting observation for us, because Mike Tomlin is a player's coach. He's loved by the players. Is that always the best thing for your organization? By and large, again, Mike Tomlin's had a really successful run. But again, it's the recent playoff history when you say that the standard is the standard and we don't live in our fears. And you see the lack of recent playoff success. Autumn checking in again, saying on the upside, the Steelers found their center of the future in Zach Frazier. Okay. Some of these comments are hilarious. Oh, man. Let's see here. Rich saying that the Steelers are good enough that they'll luck into a quarterback in the third round, or the sixth round Brady, or a third round Wilson. Interesting. Water in the desert saying they scored less tonight than they did last year in Buffalo. Believe it or not, yeah. Ed saying that Big Ben and Mason Rudolph made Tomlin successful. I think that's look, Mason Rudolph saved the season last year. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that. What would you want to see the Steelers get in return if they trade Mike Tomlin? That's another thing to consider. I would want more draft capital, and then it's like it's almost like when you get a gift card for Christmas or your birthday, and you can choose how you want to spend it. Curious to see if and when if Russ or Justin Fields leave, which teams they go to, because you've got the head coaching carousel. You've also got the quarterback carousel. It's always interesting to watch. M. Rivers asking, did Wilson have time to throw the ball downfield tonight? Got sacked several times. I think the Ravens defense, they could pin their ears back because you couldn't run the football. So the Steelers had to pass the ball. And as a lineman, when you're always going back, and you're not using your body weight and moving forward, a defense can sit on that. Me 24/7 saying that TJ Watt is always MIA in the playoffs. Look at the stats. Minka is a joke. Okay. I think pretty much any team would want to have TJ Watt on. The conversation with Minka Fitzpatrick and that contract, I think is fair to have. But I also don't think that TJ Watt's 100% at this point in the year. I don't think many guys are. It's frustrating. And so you want to point, where do you point the blame? Autumn, thank you for the super chat. Autumn saying the Steelers need better coaching staff and wide receiver and cornerback. They need a better offensive line too. On the upside, at least the Steelers found their center of the future. Yep. The coaching staff, I think, has to be evaluated all the way around. If Tomlin does stay, my question is the fall guy Terrell Austin good, bad, or indifferent? The defense was my biggest point of concern down the stretch this season, even though the offense was not acceptable at all. I thought Arthur Smith was better this year than what we've seen the last several years with the Steelers offense. But again, the offense sputtered down the stretch starting. Really, it was really George Pickens' injury, and it was that first loss during the 5-game losing streak to Philly where it was like, what are we doing here? Receiver, yeah, Deontay Johnson's been a locker room nuisance, if you will. Pittsburgh trades him to Carolina. Carolina trades him to Baltimore. Baltimore doesn't even want him, and now he's on Houston. So 3 teams in one season for Deontay, and what the contract was there too. I get it, and the influence he has on younger players, but the Steelers never really replaced Deontay Johnson. The fact that Roman Wilson didn't play this year, and then you didn't hit on your free agents and the acquisition you made at the deadline and Mike Williams, to where you give up a 5th-round pick to get Mike Williams and you largely don't use him. Van Jefferson, he's had a fine career, not what you would want. It's just straight up. And then Calvin Austin III, there's some plays here and there where you get really excited, but there's a lack of consistency. And then at the cornerback position, look, I think we're still bullish on Joey Porter Jr., but it's really hard to be a stud number 1 cornerback in this league. I think he can still do it. I think he is still a really good shutdown corner, but it's tough. It's really, really tough. Autumn, thank you for your comment and thank you for your contribution to the Bleav in Steelers show. I really appreciate it. Dylan saying that the play design was terrible this year. No creativity, nothing that makes defenses have to think. Reminded me a little bit down this stretch of Matt Canada. I hate to say it, but that's just how I feel about that. Interesting. Vadrigar saying, if I was Pickens, I would go somewhere else. George Pickens next year will be going into the final year of his rookie deal. And if I'm advising George Pickens, I'm probably not playing on that contract if I want to stay in Pittsburgh. And I say to the Steelers, either pay me or trade me. Pay me or trade me. Because to play one more year on that rookie deal, the NFL stands for not for long, and one injury could substantially jeopardize what he's going to make, and that's going to be a premium on the open market if he gets there. Even despite any frustrations that you have, even despite the fact that he had a roller coaster season, he's by far your best offensive player. And I wouldn't fault George Pickens if he wants to go elsewhere, because he has a better quarterback that can get him the ball, a better scheme that can get him the ball. He can make more plays, and he can make more money and have better production. So I would get it. I would. But I will say this, a lot of times when receivers leave Pittsburgh, it's like kryptonite. They lose the Superman cape, and it's not quite the same. But Pickens, that's another thing, and that's part of the reason why I think you got to choose between Fields and Wilson, because Pickens is going to make his money. He has one more season. If I were his agent, I'd say we're either sitting out and we're working on a new deal, make it a little bit team friendly, but go get his money George Pickens is going to get a premium for what you have to pay receivers in this league. Go look at all the top receivers. At least in terms of talent, Pickens is there in the top 5, if not top 5, top 10. A lot of people questioning Arthur Smith, too, in his future. He's got a contract, though. And, that's another thing is if we don't know the specifics of the deal, what buyouts are is everything, too. There's a lot of stuff in the politics of football that we don't know the answers to. Dana saying Tomlin to the Chicago Bears for a number 1 in the 2025 draft and a second in 2026. They already have a quarterback. Interesting. And Chicago's number 1 is the number 10 pick in this year's draft. Just to let everybody know. So I don't know if Chicago probably hang up the phone because the Steelers fleeced the Bears in the Chase Claypool trade. You get Joey Porter Jr., Chase Claypool, I believe, is playing in Canada. He's not even in the NFL. And then the Steelers fleeced the Bears in that Justin Fields trade, too. Dust settled after the 2024 NFL draft. No one needed a quarterback after that point, after free agency and the draft and the carousel. And the Steelers were the only suitor. And the fact that you get Justin Fields this past season for only a 6th-round pick, hey, that's a win for the Steelers. That's a win for Omar Khan. So if, look, both fan bases would be thrilled if this trade happened, I promise you. But if you're the Bears front office, you're probably hanging up the phone immediately if you see that 412 area code. I'm just being real here. Dana, I appreciate the comment, though. I like it. I like it. That'd be a, look, 1st-round pick or at least at minimum a 2nd-round pick for Mike Tomlin. Because I do think, look, Mike Tomlin makes up for a lot of talent deficits that you have and wins you games that you probably shouldn't in the regular season. Postseason, different discussion. Down the stretch, different discussion. It's not what I'm talking about. But he can scheme it up and win some games that he probably shouldn't. And we don't understand that right now, but it happens every year where it's like when the Steelers several weeks ago were sitting at 10-3, it was like, man, is he going to be coach of the year? There were some people that were advocating for that. Yeah, a lot of people saying Ben Johnson, a lot of people saying everybody or anybody. Kevin's saying he wants the Steelers to tank. Careful what you wish for, man, because if we're mad now, could you imagine a Steelers season after going say 3-14? That was Tennessee's record this year. They got the number 1 pick. Rekha saying we need to sign Fields. Best case scenario, he is the guy. Worst case scenario, we get a high pick. I like it. Hernandez saying he wants Ryan Day from Ohio State. Oh, I'm going to agree to disagree with you there. If you think about this with Ryan Day really quickly, if not for the college football playoff, in the expanded college football playoff with 12 teams, he'd been fired after the Michigan loss. And Ohio State's now going to play for a national championship where they're like a 10-point favorite over Notre Dame. I mean, just think about how crazy that is. Ryan Day is an NFL head coach. I'm good. I would rather keep Mike Tomlin than that. Even despite the fact that this is really frustrating. Shakir saying, get rid of Tomlin, Russ, and Pickens. Explain your logic about Russ and Pickens. Why would you get rid of your best offensive skill position player? Get rid of them for who? More draft picks? I want to know your logic there. A lot of people frustrated about Minkah Fitzpatrick, and I understand that. A lot of frustration here. Still going through comments. Kevin saying that the Steelers are in perpetual purgatory. That's a great way to put it. 9-8, 10-7. I always have to do math with the 17-game regular season. Sneak in. It's really exciting. Sometimes you sneak in. This year, could have won the division way earlier than you did. It could have taken care of business against Baltimore on the road several weeks back to win the AFC North. In control, you were 10-3, and just down the stretch, folded up like a cheap tent. All 22 films checking in. Such a tough team, Mark. A lot of respect for the Steelers organization and players. Ravens fan here, but could not respect their fight and grit more in that third quarter. Russell Wilson wasn't the issue, at least in the second half tonight. Now, from a big picture standpoint, again, even if you win this game on the road against Kansas City, on the road against Buffalo, it's too little too late at that point, too, because you dug yourself way too deep of a deficit. Temple, more Yinzer humor. Temple, this is great. Steelers are making this dry January tough for anyone doing dry January out there. Temple, I appreciate you. Stay strong, my friend. That's hilarious. Piran saying either Ben Johnson or Brian Flores as next head coach. I will say this. I would not want Brian Flores as a head coach either. I listen to a lot of players say. I don't only just listen exclusively to players. But Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's played at the highest level in the NFL, when he's been hot, he's also been a journeyman. He's played all over. Did not have good things to say about Brian Flores as a head coach. Brian Flores as your linebackers coach like Pittsburgh had, and they gave him a lifeline even though he's suing the NFL over discrimination. Get him back in the league, get him in good graces. He's now a DC in Minnesota, and Minnesota's going to try to go on a run of its own this playoffs. But as a head coach, in trying to take the next steps and having a prolific offense, I don't think Brian Flores solves that at all. Brian Flores didn't develop Tua Tagovailoa at all. They've had mixed success with Mike McDaniel in that. But in terms of developing and playing a new school of offense that you need to have true success, Brian Flores is not going to solve that if he were to become the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. It doesn't solve the same issue that you have right now. Piran, I appreciate the comment, though. A lot of people saying fire Tomlin again. I'd trade him. A lot of people saying fire him, but I would try to look into trading him to see what you could get. Because it's the same old, and we're going to be doing the same thing next year. We're really excited, and potential new quarterbacks or year two of either Wilson or Fields, and maybe bring someone else in. It's time for a change. And you wonder what could have been. Temple bringing up another good point when you were 10-3. Starting to dream of, oh, man, could this be the year they finally get over the top and win a playoff game, and maybe you get hot at the right time. You get some momentum. Maybe you had some playoff games in Pittsburgh and get the fans. Like, look, the Steelers fans, when it's right, that's a true home field advantage at what used to be Heinz Field and is now Acrisure Stadium. M. Rivers saying this, and I've said this for a long time here on the Bleav in Steelers show, is aren't we spoiled as Steelers fans because we never have these 1-15, 1-16 types of season? And it's the honest truth. There's a lot of really bad organizations in this league. The Steelers are not one of them, but they're stuck in this purgatory where they're not a contender, but they're not bottom of the barrel either. So it's like, where are you? And the notion of tanking, I think, exists in the NBA. I don't think it exists in the NFL because most guys on the 53-man roster are fighting for their future in the league for next season where their job isn't guaranteed. So I don't know what the answer is. I would look into trading Tomlin, and there's got to be some changes that are made to make a true difference to finally have playoff success. And Dana pointing this out, if we had a season at 3-14, we would get a high NFL draft pick. You don't get a quarterback, Peyton Manning, at the 22nd pick of the draft. It's the honest truth. Mike Tomlin's highest draft pick during his tenure, and this speaks to his success, was the 10th pick in the 2019 draft, and the team traded up to get Devin Bush out of Michigan. The 10th pick is his highest pick in his entire run for the Pittsburgh Steelers. How many other teams would love to have that? And I know you don't want to hear it after a crushing loss in the playoffs, but it has been a successful run for Mike Tomlin overall. It hasn't been in recent history. Hasn't been since that 2016 season. January 15th of 2017 is the last time he won a playoff game. Forrest saying that Tomlin will never get coordinators that make him look silly. Brian Flores, for an example. I disagree because, well, look, two things here, and I guess both things can be true. Mike Tomlin extended an olive branch, and it was really his idea to go bring in Brian Flores as a defensive assistant for the Pittsburgh Steelers, to extend an olive branch to get him back in the league. And the Steelers signed off on it. Art Rooney II signed off on it. Now, if you want to point to the lack of a coaching tree in the criticism of Tomlin and how other good coaches have a much more expansive coaching tree, that's a fine conversation to have. I understand that. Marvin saying that he believes the line on both sides needs to be fixed. Yeah. You were without James Daniels. Mason McCormick didn't start tonight. Dan Moore Jr. left the game with an injury too. Remember, Nate Herbig had a season-ending injury. Troy Fautano, your first-round pick, didn't play a snap this season. It was a beat-up line. I'm not trying to make excuses, but the reality of the situation is this line wasn't healthy all season long. Mr. Woodside saying he would accept a second and a fourth-round pick for Mike Tomlin. Someone checking in saying that Tomlin got a contract last season. He's done the least. Let me see Mike Tomlin's contract extension when that runs through. Runs through at least the 2027 season as it stands right now. Dana saying we will be in Groundhog Day when drafting a good quarterback and get a mediocre one when draft position is in the 20s. Yeah. So hopefully you could get some picks. This is an interesting possibility from Dana as well, saying trade TJ Watt. You have Highsmith now. I don't know that I would be, want to get rid of perhaps the best defensive player in the NFL. But at what point are there declining returns? You've got Highsmith. You also have Herbig. You actually have some depth there. Could the Steelers make a trade there to improve other facets of the roster? And then whoever your backup is there might not be as productive as those three players, but you can improve other positions on the teams. Todd checking in. And Todd leaving a super chat. Todd, I appreciate this, saying $160 million defense, yet continually it gives up 90-yard touchdown drives. Will anyone be held accountable, Mark? Accountability is the name of the game, my friend. And I think there is if Tomlin's not the fall guy himself, I'll be honest with you. I'll be surprised if Terrell Austin's still your defensive coordinator after all of this. Because you want to point the blame to something. That losing streak to Philly had the ball for almost 40 minutes in that game. Remember, the Steelers had the ball only twice in the second half, gave up 400 yards to Baltimore in the regular season. Was 389 to the Chiefs. Could look up what that number is to the Bengals tonight against the Ravens. 464 yards of offense allowed. If you're the NFL's highest paid, it's got to be better than what it was tonight. And I do not think that final score is reflective of what was pure Baltimore Ravens domination tonight. Where's the accountability? We'll see. I think you have to have an honest conversation about Terrell Austin is the future as your defense coordinator. Todd, appreciate your comment and thank you for the contributions to the Bleav in Steelers show. Donald saying TJ has slowed way down. Interesting. People saying Minkah is washed as well. Mr. Woodside saying we need the Minkah Fitzpatrick from week 1 of the 2022 season. That 2022 season, and the reason why Minkah Fitzpatrick's among the highest paid safeties in the NFL was that 2022 season, Minkah Fitzpatrick was your best offensive player, even as a safety for the Steelers. He had 6 takeaways that year. Battled injuries last year, and then this year, you're just not getting the splash plays. And people saying, Mr. Woodside saying that TJ's still better than Highsmith. Donald saying trade TJ when you can get something for him. I think all options are on the table to try to improve this roster. And not just improve the roster for improving it, but what are the things that you can do to try to compete in the AFC? A lot of big decisions coming up. Brian saying draft a quarterback, but in this year's draft, what do you do? It's not a quarterback-rich draft. Could there be someone that the Steelers draft and develop as a backup behind either Russell Wilson or Justin Fields this coming season? We'll see. It's going to be a fascinating offseason for the Pittsburgh Steelers, what the future holds for Mike Tomlin, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, other changes to the coaching staff, which guys you bring back, what trades potentially you can make. So let me get to a few more comments. Todd asking, Mark, can you think why Mike Williams only got 1 target per game? I have no clue. Why would you give up a 5th-round pick for how the Pittsburgh Steelers used him? It didn't make any sense to me. And when the Steelers threw him the football, I thought he actually made plays. Eric checking in saying that Terrell Austin needs to go, but the defense was on the field too much because Russ and the offense couldn't sustain drives. Yep, that's complimentary football. It's very well said because the Ravens had the ball for 39 minutes in tonight's game. And that's what happens where everyone wants to say, let's let Russ cook. And look, I want to see it too. Let him loose, throw the ball down the field. But when you get 29 yards of rushing, you're putting your defense in a terrible spot. I've talked to Ike Taylor about this. I've talked to other players that have had lots of NFL experience. And you ask any of them, what does it do for your defense that can then rest on the sidelines for more time when you've got someone that can move the chains and pound the rock and move the ball and control the line of scrimmage and impose your will on an opposing team? Steelers don't have that right now. Injuries along the offensive line, an ineffective running game. Straight up. Straight up. And that's where the complementary football, which I know is a cliche, but that's really important. That's really, really important. Donald saying that the Steelers will have $54 million in cap space. Yeah, it's like 53, 54 million. Cut or restructure contracts for overpriced defensive players. They have to start to move some of that capital to the offensive side of the ball. If you actually want to have troop. Like, look, I know a lot of times in leagues you zig while everyone else is zagging or vice versa. In the NFL, no, $160 million on that defense. Man, that really puts it into perspective when they don't show up. When they don't show up. I can't wait for a new running back next season, too. I want to see this ground game get going. Najee Harris, I think he's a good pro. I don't think he's what you would expect for a first-round draft pick. I think he's a professional. I think he's a good locker room guy, but his last 100-yard rushing game, he had 3 straight against the Giants, the Jets, and the Raiders, 3 terrible teams. Had 100 scrimmage yards against the Bengals on December the 1st. Hasn't had one since. And it's not all on Najee, the frustrations. It's not. But there are just improvements to this team that are pretty evident. And yeah, I would try to restructure some deals on defense too. What you can do to improve this team right now for next year. But what does the future hold for Tomlin, for Russell Wilson, for Justin Fields, for other potential changes you make to the coaching staff? And as soon as we find out about more of those, I'll be live here on the Bleav in Steelers show. And I appreciate all of you for checking in and tuning in tonight. This is the most we've had after a Steelers game. It's a crushing end to the 2024 season, which was really exciting at times because the highs were high and the lows were low. Losing 5 straight, to end the season is not how I envisioned it going, even though you knew when the schedule came out that the Steelers were going to need to front load as many wins as they could on the front half of the season. And they did that. But down the stretch, just yikes. A terrible finish this season for Pittsburgh. Jeremiah asking me this. Who is your quarterback for next season? We'll wrap here. I prioritize signing Justin Fields for, let's say, 25, maybe 30 million per year. I'd probably sign Fields to like a 2-year deal. I'd then try to maybe draft and develop a quarterback, say second, third round and on. Maybe bring back Kyle Allen or another free agent. Maybe you bring Mason Rudolph back, something like that. But Fields would be my guy. If Fields wants too much money or if he wants to go to another team, I then try to re-sign Russell Wilson. If that doesn't work, then you got to see who the free agent quarterbacks that are out there. I know Aaron Rodgers is potentially going to be out there. Again, Kirk Cousins could be out there as well if the Jets cut him after he got a monster deal. So to do that, they'd still owe him quite a bit of money. But look at the free agent quarterback market. It's not very good. Like Sam Darnold's going to be back in Minnesota. Zach Wilson doesn't. Like I'm going to read some names and they don't inspire a lot of confidence. Are you ready? Here we go. Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Jacoby Brissett, Taylor Heineke, Marcus Mariota, Jarrett Stidham, Drew Lock, Andy Dalton, Joe Flacco, Jameis Winston, Mac Jones, Carson Wentz, Jimmy Garoppolo, Case Keenum, Mason Rudolph, Cooper Rush, Josh Dobbs. I mean, I could keep going, but the point being is none of these guys inspire a lot of confidence. So they've got to re-sign either Wilson or Fields, maybe both. But again, for what price for each? Does it make sense for the things that you need to do and other improvements you need to make along the roster? Temple, I really appreciate this, saying thanks for a great season, leaving a contribution for $10. Always look forward to these post-game live shows, win or lose. Temple, thank you for being a longtime supporter here on the Bleav in Steelers show. Jeremiah also saying, what coach you think needs to be gone? I would see what you could get in a trade for Mike Tomlin. I would start there. I'd call up one of the 6 vacancies, maybe Dallas as well, to say, hey, we'll offer you Mike Tomlin. What would you send back? And what do you want back? Demand a first-round pick for the success and the track record of how that would excite a fan base. Like if Chicago got Mike Tomlin, I'm telling you this right now, I grew up in the Chicago suburbs. People would be over the moon for Mike Tomlin if he was head coach of the Chicago Bears. I'm telling you this right now without a doubt in my mind. So I call up the other teams to figure out what you could get. If you could get a first-round pick for it, I'd consider it. But then you have to then say, hey, if it's Ben Johnson or some other hotshot young head coach that you could bring in that helps get this team to where it needs to be, especially offensively, who else would be out there that you know would be an upgrade from Mike Tomlin? Because I'll be honest with you, even despite the fact of the lack of playoff success recently, most head coaches that are first-year head coaches with teams don't have that much success. Maybe you need to have a down year or two, restock in the draft, restock the cupboard right now. And that's where I've always argued that Mike Tomlin's been he's been his own victim in that his success has hamstrung him in the big picture, and the big picture is trying to win a Super Bowl. And a lot of people saying Mike Tomlin has no trade clause. Well, then you have to consider, would you potentially fire him and then try to go get one of the head coaches? These are conversations that you could have. And yeah, you can have something in your contract. Things can be amended all the time. It's the NFL. So that's what you have to consider if you're Pittsburgh. You have to say, if you fire him, who are 3 guys that you're going to target, because you might not get your first choice. So if you could get Ben Johnson instead of Mike Tomlin, I'd probably do it. I would. But Ben Johnson might say, I want to go to another team that I think is going to provide a better level of success than Pittsburgh would. And then again, I would start with Fields, then I would go Wilson. And then I try to maybe get a quarterback in this year's draft, but really it's that 2026 draft that I'm looking at. I know everyone's going to want Arch Manning in a year from now. I get it. But that type of guy where it's like, oh, this is the next dude. Steelers haven't had that guy since Ben Roethlisberger was doing his thing. Jeremiah says he wants Doug Peterson as head coach. That is my cue to wrap up. My name's Mark Bergin. I appreciate all of you. Thanks for a terrific season. This coming week, I will be back with more Steelers recap. There's going to be more great guests here on the Bleav in Steelers show. And as news breaks this offseason, keep it here on Bleav in Steelers for the changes that are to come for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers lose tonight against the Baltimore Ravens, 28-14. Pittsburgh season is over. My name's Mark Bergin. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I will see you next time here on this feed this coming week. Until then, take care. So long, everybody.